we go. Right, so let me get rid of this here. Fantastic. So as Coco was saying, basically what we do is we use virtual reality gaming for neuro rehabilitation. A quick overview of who we are. Evolv is actually a spin-off, a recent spin-off of a larger company called Virtualware, based here in Bilbao, Spain, although we do have offices in London. We are a medical device manufacturer, and really our specialty is rehabilitation technologies. Our main goal, our main purpose really, is that we want to develop really affordable yet effective rehabilitation technologies where patients actually become active participants in their own care. Now that sounds kind of nonsensical, because you would say, well, why aren't patients actually part of their own care? Well, very often when a patient who has suffered a stroke goes to a therapist, they become very passive in the sense that they've lost physical ability, maybe cognitive ability, and quite often they are manipulated physically as part of their therapy. And they actually sort of get into the state where they want to, where they expect things to happen to them as opposed to actually doing things. And we're trying to change that through the use of technology. So in 2011, we developed a product called Virtual Rehab, and it actually began as a, well, really a very small scale project for a multiple sclerosis patient society or patient association here in Bilbao. We're using video games as part of the rehabilitation process. They were using the Wii Fit, they were using the Kinect games. People really liked them, but what was happening was that since multiple sclerosis is a neurodegenerative disease, people would see their physical decline reflected in the game score. So they would, they'd be playing tennis, Wii tennis, and they would see that, they're doing really well a few months ago. A couple months ago, they started playing badly. 1 month ago, they were doing very badly, and now they're doing extremely poor, and they don't want to play anymore. So therapists were telling us they liked the part of the gaming element, the engaging element of games, but what they didn't like was they had absolutely no control of the games because they were developed for 12-year-old boys to zap zombies in their living room. So they asked us basically to, one, develop a video game-like therapy solution, two, let them control it as therapists, the level of difficulty, and three, give them objective data. So that was sort of the brief that we were given. We developed a very simple game of a stick person touching targets and lifting their legs and things like that. It went really, really well. People really, really liked it. People were asking how they could buy it and use it at home. So we said, there's something interesting going on here. Maybe we should look at developing a product. And that's how Virtual Rehab began. So Virtual Rehab is really, right now, it's a CE certified medical device. It's a virtual rehabilitation platform. And what we do is we combine virtual reality, motion capture systems, and gamification. And what we try to do is we try to increase or augment the amount of rehabilitation that somebody will receive in a normal setting, right? So the idea is that they can use our system to increase the amount of therapy, the dose of therapy that they would receive normally in a clinic. The exciting thing for us is that it can be used in the clinic, but it can also be used in the home, as Coco alluded to earlier. And we'll get into that whole idea of telerehabilitation a little bit later on. So I am sad to say that we have absolutely no PhDs on in our company. So we are not academics. We are software developers. We are designers. And as you said, I'm an architect, so I actually don't belong here. But the idea is that we have a very good network, and a lot of them are in the UK, of therapists, neurologists, researchers, and patients, because we're very patient-centric. So when we patients are sort of at the center of what we do. So right now, Virtual Rehab, from its humble beginnings in 2011 as sort of this one-off project, has been used by several thousand patients around the world who are receiving rehabilitation. It's been used in over 250 centers and in 20 countries around the world. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you a little bit of what Virtual Rehab is about.
Now, if you've got children or grandchildren, you will have watched in awe as their thumbs and fingers dance across computer games like Minecraft and Gran Turismo.
Now that technology is being used for another purpose. Basildon Hospital is the first in the region to fund what it's calling virtual rehab. It's improving the health of patients with serious neurological conditions.
Reg Staples from Essex was fit and healthy until last March. He had a sudden heart attack. For 3 hours, paramedics worked to save him. A blood clot formed on his spine, paralysing him from the waist down.
You can't do things you used to do. Like, I used to do all my own decorate, do everything myself. It's very hard to adjust.
That's why he's doing all he can to stay independent. Every week he travels to Basildon Hospital and was the first to sign up for a new kind of physiotherapy.
So you have to turn it back and bring it down. So it has to go in the shadow. Good. And this is back towards you a bit, up a little bit. Good.
The hospital's using console technology, an Xbox adapted by a company to provide health-based training. It's strengthening Reg's upper body and helping others with head injuries, Parkinson's and MS.
Patients can see themselves as an avatar, so it gives them the motivation to improve their posture, participate, reach that bit further for the targets instead of us shouting at them to do it. And it's really motivating for them, and we can track their progress with the statistics on the screen as well.
And this is how the sensor works. You can see here all the white shapes on the body are actually joints that the sensors are picking up. So here you can see all my finger joints, and here the hinge at the elbow. The virtual rehab's so successful, the University of East Anglia is also running trials with stroke patients. Reg's physiotherapist uses his results to focus on the right parts of his body.
Now I can go out there and I can cook myself something, which I wouldn't do before. I wouldn't even make a cup of tea because of the kettle being too hot or something. With the rehabilitation, it's made me more confident.
The equipment costs under £5,000, paid for by the Trust's charitable fund, who consider it cost-effective. It's now hoped more consoles can be leased to be used in patients' homes. Nikki Fox, BBC Look East, Basildon.
Right. So were you able to see that? Was that okay? Okay, great. So that'll give you sort of an idea of what we do. So those are these extra games that we create. So in order to for people to do the rehabilitation. Sorry about this. Let me just get this back here again. Let me just get off this note here in Spanish. There we go. So basically what we've done is we've tried to create a platform where we can treat different types of pathologies. We can treat different types of syndromes and conditions that are caused by those pathologies. So we're currently developing, we've either have several products that are already out in the market, and we're developing new ones. So basically we're treating gross motor movement through virtual rehab body. We're doing fine motor skills retraining through virtual rehab hands, which are using 2 different types of motion capture systems. We're also working on fall prevention for the elderly. MALT is a motor and language training application to treat aphasia and other language impairments. That's a project that we're working on, or a product we're working on with Reading University. Spatial neglect, we're also treating as well, which is this loss of perception of half the world after a brain injury, an acquired brain injury like stroke. So that we're working on that with the University of East Anglia. And we're also working on cognitive rehabilitation as well. So very simply, how does virtual rehab work? It's quite simple. There's really 2 main actors in our theater here. We have therapists on one end, and we have the patients on the other end. Now, as you could see, for example, in the case of Reg at Basildon, the patient and the therapist were in the same, literally in the same room. So the therapist, basically what they do is they use our manager system to create patient profiles. Then they can basically set up different types of virtual activities for them. They can then run them, and then they can track their performance data on that. Now, we talked about how people could be doing that in a clinical setting, but they can also be doing that in the home setting as well through telerehabilitation. So as I mentioned, it's been used in 20 countries around the world. Here are some examples of people using it of all ages, all shapes and sizes, different types of pathologies as well. Just to give you an idea, for example, this one right here is a photo of a chap using it at the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability in South London. They just installed that a couple of weeks ago. And then we have installations going on all over the world right now as well. So I mentioned we have the extremely good luck of working with some absolutely fantastic clinicians and researchers as well. There in the UK, we work with the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery at Queen's Square. We work with the Royal Hospital of Neurodisability. We also work with the NIHR. They've been quite helpful in giving us some small funding for certain projects as well there in the UK. So we have a very strong connection to the UK. And there's another further list of other people that we work with. So we have a really, really good international network of people that are helping us constantly develop the product, testing it, and helping us launch the solution as well. So Coco sort of alluded kind of some of the things that we work on: stroke, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, dystrophy, spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries. We work on with kids with cerebral palsy, but we're also starting to sort of branch out and looking at new avenues for us, for sales as well. So we're working on musculoskeletal conditions, pediatrics, orthopedics a little bit, and we're really getting into geriatrics, frailty, especially for older people. One of the things that we're really interested in doing is treating, and we talked about, having people sort of making this patient-centric. We see neuro rehabilitation really similar to the way an elite athlete will train as well. An elite athlete who's training either for the marathon or something like that. It's not a question of just running and just doing a lot of running. It's a whole health and lifestyle commitment. And we think that's part of what we want to do as well. So we're initially starting with these extra games, but we're branching out into sort of health and wellness for different types of neurological diseases and disorders. And I'll give a little bit more information about that afterwards. So really, what is the situation? What's the panorama right now in some of these conditions that we talked about? Well, just looking at stroke, for example, in the UK, every year there's over 100,000 strokes. 85% of the people who suffer stroke survive, and 2/3 of those leave the hospital with some type of disability. One of the big issues is that stroke is occurring in younger people each year. So the last point here is 1/3 of the strokes are occurring in people between 40 and 69. So those are people who are at working age. And in many cases, once they've had the stroke, their working life has finished. So that's something to keep in mind. Right now, there are 1.2 million stroke survivors in the UK, and it's costing the UK $26 billion a year to provide services for that. So either through the NHS or social services, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's a lot of people to treat. The issue is the Royal College of Physicians has a sort of a guideline of stroke treatment. And in 2013, they published one of the guidelines, one of the first guidelines, and they stated categorically that each stroke patient should receive 45 minutes of each relevant therapy for a minimum of 5 days a week, which means that they should receive occupational therapy, they should receive physiotherapy, they might need to have language, cognitive, et cetera, et cetera. 5 days a week. So there's a couple of issues there. There are not enough people to provide that type of service through the NHS. Very often people have to pay out of pocket or through insurance to get additional rehabilitation. And only recently, the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy launched a report or published a report which stated that only 29% of the people who were surveyed who had long-term health conditions like stroke or like multiple sclerosis felt that they received enough rehabilitation via the NHS. The word abandonment is something that comes up over and over again. So obviously something has to change. More people will not be coming into the NHS. In fact, through Brexit, more people are leaving it, unfortunately, in terms of European nurses and therapists and so on. So we see a real opportunity for technology to take over there. Another issue, and I won't go into all the details, is fall prevention for older adults as well. A huge issue, not only in the UK, but all over the world. And we've tried to look at what we can do, and we've created a digital fall prevention program that consists of customized, basically physical exercises that are based on traditional, validated exercises. We've added assessments, we've added tips, we've added a whole bunch of questionnaires to see how they're feeling, mood, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to have a very holistic approach to fall prevention. And we've been validating it here in Spain, and we've gotten fantastic results with it. So gaming is not just for young people. We have people who are as old as 93 years old using gaming to improve their health. So I'm just going to show you a very, very quick video just of sort of how this fall prevention application works. So it's basically being used for residences and care homes and out in the community. We're using it for tele-rehab here. We're testing it as well. The idea is that they're playing these very simple games to improve balance. Okay. The idea as well that through the balance, what we want to try to do is they improve their confidence so that they don't feel that they're always worried about falling. Because once you've fallen as an older person, your confidence is shot. You tend not to go out as much, your social life is over, and unfortunately, depression sets in. In many cases, people die, as they say, from a broken heart. Well, very often, a lot of people who've fallen do die very soon afterwards. And it's not only because of the fall, but because of sort of the consequences of that. So we have a whole bunch of these different games that they play, and it's just repetition, repetition, repetition. That's sort of key to what we do. So I'm just going to basically go to the next one. So the type of technologies that were used, I sort of mentioned that we use three types of technology, or three elements. Basically, we use basically virtual reality, we use motion capture, and we use gaming. Now there's two types of virtual reality. Everybody knows the new VR with glasses. I'm sure some of you have probably tested it as well or tried it out. We initially started off with what we call non-immersive VR. Non-immersive VR is basically using a flat screen where you have an avatar which represents the person. So the person is somehow represented in sort of a 3D setting. And the idea is that the control is either done through a joystick or a mouse or a sensor like we use. Immersive VR obviously has sort of a more, as the word, you know, is basically says, it's a little bit more immersive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's any better or more efficient. So in fact, we've found that in some cases that we've tested people who've used they've used sort of a flat screen VR system that we use, and they use sort of the headsets. And especially if you're dealing with people who've already had for some sort of traumatic brain injury or acquired brain injury, some of them it will be detrimental for them to use a system like immersive VR, so wearing the headsets. Really what we want to try to do, and the effectiveness of a VR system really comes about because of it's highly interactive, it gives direct feedback to the users, and the user feels that they are in control of the situation. So there's maximum engagement, and that's really what allows us to basically have success with flat screen, non-immersive VR. So we're quite successful with it. We're going to continue using it. We're allowed to use it because we use motion capture systems like the Microsoft Kinect, which is an off-the-shelf system. We use the Leap Motion for hand rehabilitation. And this is basically allows us to work around the world because this is accessible in pretty much every country in the world. So that's really important for us. And obviously the gaming element is very important as well. We use sort of gamification. We take typical gaming elements like scoring and competition and rewards, and we sort of add them to healthcare, making them sort of what they call serious gaming. And basically it's been shown, and we have this is a great, I love this basic chart here. This is by somebody that we work with, David Petrino, who's at Mount Sinai, and he did a test using not our games, but some games that he developed himself with stroke patients. And it showed there was a direct correlation between the amount of fun that somebody was having, or the amount of engagement they felt, and their improvement. The more engaged you have the patient, the more that they're willing to work harder, to do more repetitions, and the outcome is always improvement, basically, in most cases. So this idea of really creating these purpose-built video games for rehabilitation, where we can place people in environments where they have to do lots of repetition, lots of movements that are going to help them work the impaired limb, really can help us induce what we call neuroplasticity. That's sort of one of the key functions of what we're doing. So I'm sure most of you know what neuroplasticity is. Some of those who you might not know, but it's the brain's ability really to change and to adapt over time, right from when the person is born. Initially, scientists thought that plasticity sort of stopped after a certain age, but it's been disproven, and it's been shown that neuroplasticity continues basically until death. So that's great for us because we're working with elderly people as well. And the idea, basically, what we want to do is through neuroplasticity is be able to basically allow people to rewire the brain. So when somebody suffers a stroke, one part of the brain is affected. That part of the brain might have been in control of certain motor function, for example, the use of one of their limbs, their upper limb, that's been affected, so it doesn't allow them to continue to use it correctly. That is able to be changed. We're able to modify that, but that has to be done through lots of repetition. So that function can be moved from one part of the brain to another, but simply by doing. In the same way that a child learns by doing, the same way that an athlete improves by doing, an elderly person who suffered a stroke can recover motor function, but by doing a lot of repetitive activity. So I put this expression, neuroplasticity allows us to reteach an old dog old tricks. I mean, it's sort of a strange take on the typical adage, but that's what it is. It allows us to basically to show a person how to basically grab a cup and put it to their mouth and to drink correctly once again with the affected limb. So here's some examples of what we do. So this was originally the first game that we did. And basically what we do is we take traditional therapeutic movements and exercises and we translate them to games. So you can see what the movements were and how in the bottom row of photos in the game that we first developed, the very first game, how we translated that into games. And that's basically what we do. We have therapists tell us exactly what they want us to do, what are the traditional exercises that they do, and we make games out of it. Validation is obviously important. Our first validation was in 2012. Important things were, for example, this were with 20 persons who were living with MS over a 3-month period. They used virtual rehab a few times a week for half an hour. And we basically saw that there was an improvement in the reduction in fatigue. There's improvements in static balance and dynamic balance, which are big problems in multiple sclerosis. But really what was interesting for us was there was a reduction in anxiety and depression. People, when they were going to therapy, they knew that they were going to be playing. They knew that they weren't going to be manipulated. They weren't going to be moved around, which can be painful. It can be boring. And they were enjoying going to therapy. So that was really key for us. Very, very important. So we talked about clinical settings. Now, this whole crisis is wonderful for us in the sense that it's showing how, and what we're doing today is showing how we can really replace things that had to be in person, one-to-one before, virtually. And so what we're looking at is how can we increase dose and intensity of therapy by providing it through telerehabilitation. The idea is basically a person can do basically the same things that they're doing with a clinician, not all the same things, but they can do a certain amount of activity in home. So more dose, more intensity leads to better patient outcomes. We have some experience. It's still fairly new. We've done some stuff. We're doing a new project in the UK with stroke patients, which was an NIHR funded project, which is fantastic. We've done things in Germany, Italy, and Spain, Argentina. So quite a few things. It's starting to become a bit of let's say, in the mouths of a lot of people of how they want to use telerehabilitation, and we're really interested in doing that. Efficacy has been proven around the world, so that's not an issue anymore. I was going to show this last video. I won't show it, but this is a solution that we're doing for visual neglect or spatial neglect, which is basically this loss of perception of one side of the world. And basically the idea is that we're creating video games where people can do them at home because there's no way that they can get enough repetition done in a clinical setting. And this is going quite well. This is something that we're working on with the University of East Anglia. So we are starting to work with immersive VR projects little by little. We're doing more projects than anything. We're doing some stuff with executive function. We're treating hemianopsia, which is sort of blindness that's caused by sort of traumatic acquired brain injuries. And we're also doing VR solutions for spatial neglect as well. And really what's coming up next for us, we're starting to develop our own hardware, which is quite interesting. The idea is that we really want to try to see if we can go direct to consumer as opposed to go through clinics. We are working on new solutions for telerehabilitation to simplify the technology. So this image right here is a little tele kit where we add the computer, all the hardware into one little system. You press a blue button and away you go. We're starting to work with more complicated systems like robotics as well. We're adding wearables, especially for fall prevention, which is really interesting. And last but not least, which is very in fashion right now, but we are looking at how we can add machine learning to improve the therapy process. So that is basically it for me. I don't know how well I'm doing for time or if I've done poorly, but I hope you've fantastic. So I hope you got something interesting out of it. Just to talk about the business end very quickly, we are basically self-funded. So we actually, crazily enough, just basically started working by selling product. That's sort of how we went along. We were lucky enough to be within a larger company, so we were able to sort of survive those pitfalls of a startup. We are a startup in this phase as Evolv. We started in 2017. We have a bit of money from the provincial government here in the province of Vizcaya. They have they put a bit of cash into our company. We are going to be doing a Series A round fairly soon because we want to grow in the States. We have a lot of options to do things in the States. We were very interested in doing stuff in the UK because you have a fabulous funding system there, but unfortunately Brexit threw a very big monkey wrench into our plans there. So we are still very strongly tied to the UK. We have fabulous partners there, academic and clinical partners there, but I think in terms of setting up a company there, we'll have to see how everything plays out. And of course, coronavirus has thrown another monkey wrench into the work. So we'll have to see how all that plays out. But we are still incredibly, how do I say this? Very happy to be working in the UK. We think it's you have an absolutely fantastic academic and healthcare system. So that's something you should be very proud of.
Thanks, David.
No worries.
Thanks, David. Oh, we've got feedback. No, I think it's going well. Before we break for lunch, we do have some time to take some questions for David. So if anyone has any, please do pop them down in the chat. Already have one. A really exciting concept, and as you said, very relevant to our current situation. My question is about whether you have had instances of overexertion and injury due to patients becoming overly competitive in the games and not directly supervised by a nurse.
Well, in fact, and that's something I left out, and that's a great question. In fact, all of the activities that we do are personalized to each patient. So the idea is that a therapist, although they're not physically in the room, will have set up all of the activities, the number of repetitions they need to do, the amount of time that they're going to be doing it, so that when a person plays it, whether it be in a clinical setting, in a community center, or in their home, it's basically being vetted by a therapist. And they know their patient, they do assessments beforehand, so they know the amount of activity that they're able to do. So that's a very good question, but yes, safety is of utmost importance for us, especially in the case of fall prevention, where we are dealing with people who are seniors, and yeah, it's very, very important to make sure that they don't overdo it, as you pointed out.
It's a very important part of it.
Sure.
If there aren't any more questions from the audience, I think something I wanted to touch on was that, you know, usually we've got people in academia wanting to go out to industry, but you are kind of industry wanting to go to academia, and you mentioned that you have this network with neurologists. Oh, that was some bad feedback. So, you know, you have this network of neurologists and hospitals around the UK and around Europe. How did you find the process of reaching out to these contacts, and were they receptive at first? And how did you pitch to them this idea of technology into their normal clinical setting?
Well, I'll be quite honest. So we don't have to pitch to anybody. In fact, people come to us. To be honest with you.
I'm not surprised, actually.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, and I think the reason is, and I think there's been a massive shift in terms of academia, because you know, maybe 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, the important thing for an academic was to publish papers, and that was it, pretty much. You know, there was very little contact with industry. What's happened, and we're seeing it. This has actually sort of gone a bit over. It's been a bit overkill, because now we have to turn down a lot of people. It seems that. Because obviously I think the question is that there's less money coming into universities, so they are looking for other ways of income, you know, providing income, generating income. So this whole idea of academic industrial partnerships is very much the norm now. So what's happened, and what we've always been interested in, is there's a lot of great, fantastic ideas out there in academia. There's also stuff that isn't that fantastic. I mean, they're great ideas, but maybe, you know, they're not applicable to the real world. But what we try to do is we try to sort of sort out things that we think would be of interest and have commercial viability to them. And basically what we try to do is come up to an agreement with, and it's not usually the academic per se, it is the university, and that's really where the negotiating comes in. And some of the negotiating has been painful at times, and other times it's been quite easy and simple. And I think there's this understanding that it's better that these ideas get out and actually help people, because really our main goal, we're not going to become multimillionaires by what we do. We want to help people. That's really our basic goal. So if we can do that by taking a fantastic idea that would have normally just have sat in a desk somewhere, in a desk drawer, and if we can take that, sort of rework it, make it a little bit more attractive, make it commerciable, and bring it out, well, that's fantastic. And I think most academics, again, they're not, in some cases, some of them are entrepreneurial, most of them are not, but really what they want to do is they want to see what their, if their idea can come to life, and if we can become a part of it. So again, we get tons of requests. And in fact, once we started working with, for example, University of East Anglia, then a whole bunch of other people started coming along. And I think it's a fantastic time. And I would suggest, I would really, really recommend to academics, if it is possible to have an industrial partner, that will make your life a lot easier. If not, you have absolutely fabulous funding mechanisms there in the UK to help you get